Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our brand new podcast where we dive headfirst into the universes crafted by our two favorite authors. I am Austin, your co-host for today's adventure.
And I'm Abby. We are two book nerds who could talk for hours about the heroes and villains of Middle-earth and Westeros. What started as a couple of siblings comparing notes on two powerhouse fantasy series has become a full-blown podcast, and we are so excited to wander these worlds with you.
So you're probably wondering why these two authors? Well, both J.R.R. Tolkien and George R.R. Martin have a profound ability to create these vast, intertwined universes that are easy to escape into and provide a wide array of characters to love and hate.
Absolutely. Whether you're a diehard fan who can quote whole passages, or if you're someone just starting your journey into these realms, we've got something for you. Our goal is to make these stories accessible to everyone, no matter your level of familiarity.
And a bit about us. Abby and I grew up surrounded by these tales. Our dad mandated that we read all the Lord of the Rings books before we could watch any of the movies, and we would all meet up on Sunday nights to watch Game of Thrones together.
We've had countless discussions about our favorite characters, unexpected plot twists, and the sneaky foreshadowing used throughout both sets of novels. This banter fueled our desire to create a podcast.
And in our upcoming episodes, expect some deep dives into the lore and the characters, some comparisons between the realms, and interviews with some special guests who love the series just as much as we do.
And don't worry, we'll try to keep it conversational and fun. We want this to feel like you're sitting around with fellow fans having a lively chat about your favorite stories.
We encourage you to join our conversations online. Share your theories, tell us your grievances, or just chat about how you discovered these epic sagas yourself.
What's your favorite character arc in Game of Thrones, or your favorite battle scene in The Lord of the Rings? Can you act it out scene by scene? We want to hear from you.
So, for the love of the lore, grab a flag and a veil, and let's go on an adventure! Okay, so we are going to begin with the chapter 3 of the Silmarillion, is the coming of elves and the captivity of Melkor. Correct. Man, I nailed that. It's almost like Alex just told me what it was. So this chapter, we obviously have the coming of the elves. I know, shocking. Didn't see that one coming.
It's not like the title of this episode is Talking Elvish.
Yes. Good name. Proud of you.
Thank you.
So this chapter begins with the creation of the world by the Valar and the coming of the children of LOTR, and those are the elves. So the elves are the first children to be awoken. We did talk a little bit last time about the dwarves. They're a whole different situation, but if you didn't hear that podcast, please go back and hear about the creation of the dwarves. Very enlightening. But the elves, they arise under the stars, beside the waters of the Quivinen. Did I pronounce that right?
I'm going to say yes, but I have no idea.
Okay. So this is in the Far East of Middle-earth, and the awakening of the elves is a pretty significant event. And, as a lot of times in the book, they are referred to as I wouldn't say the favorite, but the most important creation of the Valar. Yep. There's some jealousy that goes on later with the dwarves and the elves. We'll get into that later. Yep. But they are considered the quote-unquote favorites, just like Grandma. Every grandma has a favorite grandkid. They won't say it, but we know they do. So it is said that the elves' awakening was part of LOTR's grand plan and was foretold in the music of the Ayunar. And so, rightly so, the elves are called the firstborn, or...
Gwendy.
Yeah, I knew he'd know.
Okay.
It's almost like it's on the page right there. So they are described as being fair and noble beings with a deep connection to the world around them. And they possess great beauty and strength and intelligence. And they are immortal, they are natural, and their lives are tied to the world itself. So that's why they care so deeply about cultivating it and keeping it good and healthy and whatnot, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So, initially, they are united in their love for the natural world and live in peace in the Quivinen, but there's not a lot of outside force messing with them, so they kind of have free reign to make the world as they like and make it all nice and pretty with their trees and their birds and such. And but they don't have much controversy yet. So it's a peaceful time for now. But Tolkien does talk about, I did a very quick rendition, but he does go into how the elves look and how majestic they are and how shaped their faces are and how beautiful how fair, that's a good word. And that's why we were talking about this the other day, about the casting of the elves in Peter Jackson's rendition, which I think he did a great job because what is Elrond's actor name? Now, see, I'm blanking.
Mr. Anderson.
It's Mr. Anderson. That's his name. But he looks like an elf through and through. It's just the certain facial features, and of course, Galadriel herself in Lord of the Rings.
Like long, pointy,
tall. It's just the epitome of elves. I think he did a great job casting them. So, so now that the elves are awake, we are starting to dive into kind of factions of elves, if you will. That's kind of how I think of it. Groups, clans. Factions, yes, clans. And each of them kind of have their own unique outlook on life itself and how life should go on Arda, on Earth. And so first, this is more of a refresher for me because, like Alex, I've read the Silmarillion before, but I was in high school and I probably paid half attention to what I was reading. It's one of those. It's a lot. So I forgot about two of these groups. The first one is the Vanyar. What I have is that they are the first group to respond to the summons of the Valar. They are led by Ingwe and are the most devoted to the Valar and their way of life. And they are the most closely allied with the Valar, and they are characterized by purity and by loyalty. That's really all I got out of the chapter from them. I don't know if our resident expert has anything else.
Only other thing is that so they're the first ones to go over to Valar. They were the first ones to actually make that trek and go across, and they almost never come back. There's only a few Vanyar that actually ever come back to Middle Earth after that.
Okay,
so pause because I am not an expert. So just a refresher: Valar is like the Undying Lands.
Mm-hmm. Right? Yes, okay. That is where it's like the elves' utopia. Okay, basically is what you can think of it.
So I didn't know they can go and come back.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, just for some context, too, you can edit stuff in post, right? Maybe I should before we dive into the three groups. But so, context.
Context matters.
So Melkor is still, before the elves awake, Melkor is still very much running rampant across the earth, Arda. And
sowing discord.
Yeah, so he's got all his minions going all across. He's creating dark creatures, dark forests, etc. The Valar know that the elves are the firstborn, are going to wake pretty soon, so they have a big debate. Hey, we don't want these guys to wake up into a mess with a lot of evil creatures, get either killed or get turned, evil. So they have a big debate, and the end of that debate is Manwë reminding them that they need to let these elves, firstborn, have free will. They need to fight their own battles, and that it's been prophesized through the music that the only guidance they would have is from the stars.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So then one of the Valar creates the stars, and then once the stars are created, that is actually what sparks the firstborn to arise.
Gotcha.
And then because there is such discord still from Melkor, they end up coming to agreement with Manwë where they can send ambassadors over. And I think Orome, the hunter, actually first discovers, if my memory serves correctly, he actually first discovers the elves are awake when he's hunting in Arda, sees them. They're actually terrified of him when they first see him because they're so used to Arda. But when they awake, they kind of get attacked right away. A lot of evil creatures, evil stuff run around Arda. So they are very fearful kind of creatures naturally.
Yep.
Okay.
So when they see Orome, who is a good guy, a Valar, they're actually terrified of him at first, but he does end up getting to be able to talk to a few of them. Ingwe was one of the first ones he talked to. He goes back, tells the Valar, hey, these guys are awake, goes right back to Middle Earth, and then tries to kind of coax and help guide them. And again, it is agreed upon with Manwë they can send ambassadors over to help talk to them and then get them to come over to Valar.
Okay.
So with that context, again, they have to do a lot of battles, kind of, traverse, if you will, through Arda. And then to get to Valar, it actually was a big journey, and there were no boats that they had because they had to cross the sea. So Valar was across the sea, so they actually had to go up and around to the north, and then all the way back down again. And I'm sure a lot of the readers at this point know that Melkor's base of operations was in the north, so he traversed very closely to his base of operations to actually make it over to Valar.
This was really impressive because this is touched upon a little bit later in the script, and this guy just knew it already.
Yeah.
And so these three groups are kind of this is an order of how they got to Valar. So the Vanyar are the very first ones to latch on to Ingwe, their leader, latch on to Arome, the other ambassadors from Valar, say, yep, we're going to go over with you guys, and they make the trek right away. The Noldor are the second group to make that trek, and then the Teleri. Some Teleri actually never make the trek. Some of them, this third group's kind of a mishmash of various elven clans. Some stay in Middle Earth, but then some Teleri actually do make a trek over too.
Yeah, and for more context, they really split into these groups because of Melkor's chaos bringing and doings and talking to some of these elves and convincing them, maybe you should listen to Valar. Maybe you should do your own thing in Middle Earth here with me. And there's a lot of speculation that he actually recruits some elves. I don't...
Oh, yeah. We'll get into that. I don't want to touch too much on Melkor because obviously there is a lot of... there are future battles with him in this chapter that we'll touch on with the captivity. So,
well, I mean, the second group right here, the Noldor, that we're about to talk about, are our big plot point going forward here. So yeah, the Noldor are the second group to answer the summons, and they are led by Finwë. And they are known for their great intellect, they are great craftsmen, and they are known for their ambition. The Noldor are curious and eager to learn from the Valar, but they also, kind of like I said, it's hinted that Melkor sows a little bit of this in their minds. They see that they are independent and prideful of their own lives and don't need to deal with the Valar. But as Alex kind of just said, some of them think more independently. Some of the Noldor still think that the Valar are right. This is where we really start to get some conflict here. And the Noldor themselves are a group that will play a significant role in the history of Middle-earth. And as their leader, Fëanor, becomes one of the most important figures in the story. And we will hear a lot about Fëanor next episode. A lot about him. He's a very interesting fella.
Okay.
And then third group, the Talari. This is the largest group of the elves, but they're the most reluctant to leave. They are led by Olwe, and they are the most diverse of the three groups, but they are not as eager to travel west and northwest really to leave. They kind of think that they want to stay in Middle Earth. They want to cultivate this land themselves and make a life here. So that's kind of the three groups of elves you'll be hearing about in this chapter and going forward, but want to break them down for you so you kind of have some knowledge of what's...
So we have, to recap.
Yes.
We have the Vanyar, Noldor, and Teleri.
Yes.
Okay. Got it.
So, as a bit of a recap, the Valar, who are the powerful, malevolent beings, have been watching over the world, and they are aware, as Alex said, of the Elves' awakening. So they decide, let's get the elves over here to Aman, and this is where they hope to teach them about the world, and also, as Alex said, protect them from Melkor, because they are a little hesitant about making the elves fight their fight, but as we'll see, that the elves actually become quite an asset for the Valar. So they send some messages, and many of them agree to journey westward towards Aman. And the journey is long, and as we said, some of the elves are pretty reluctant to leave. So at the same time that they're dealing with the aftermath of Melkor's first rebellion, where he was cast into the void, and he is eventually released from this void, and this is where he begins to sow his discord and tries to weave in some hatred for the Valar into the elves as they start to migrate west. And as this division goes on, he is starting to become deeply envious of the elves by their beauty and their immortality, and he just is kind of an angry elf. He's an angry elf towards the Valar. He wants to sow this discord in the elves. It's just kind of a little FU. I kept it PG-ish.
Yeah. It's a family show.
Yes, it's a family show. Family friendly. So, while some of the elves, like the Noldor, are eager to learn from the Valar and travel to Aman, others become a little suspicious because of the whispers of Melkor. So he fosters these doubts, and he's playing on the Talari's reluctance to leave and kind of convincing them, like, maybe just stay, build your own world here, make it better than what the Valar are doing. And they really start to buy it. And Melkor's ultimate goal is to break up the unity of the elves, because, as Alex said, when they first came, they were faced with a lot of peril, a lot of battle, and they did form a nice unity, but Melkor said, if I'm going to beat them, I need to break that up. So that's kind of where he starts to convince them, like, yeah, maybe
Don't trust the Valar.
don't trust, no trust.
No trust.
Not big trust, no trust. So now the elves, the ones that decide to leave, begin their great pilgrimage, if you will, to the west. And the Vanir and the Noldor, they do agree to go to Valar, or to follow Valar to Aman. And while most of the Vanir go, some in Noldor stay. But the Valar do prepare for the Great Migration, and the elves, they begin their long journey across Middle-earth. I have no idea how long it's going to take them. I don't
I
remember.
don't think he ever says
I
really.
assume a while, though.
It takes a while.
It's pretty big. So during the journey, there's a lot of hardships, and some of the elves, their faith begins to falter, and a pretty large portion of the Talari are hesitant to leave, and they become known as the Sindar, which now my Lord of the Rings nerds out there should know about the Sindarian elves. They are known as the Grey Elves, but they are eventually the elves that inhabit Mirkwood.
Correct.
And one of the goats
Legolas.
is a Sindar himself. Yes, Legolas is a Sindarian elf himself. So he does derive from the group that was the Talari who were hesitant to leave. Does your mind know if this bothered the Valar at all? That they wanted to stay?
No, I don't think so. I think they knew that there were going to be some that were going to want to stay in Amon and not go to Valar.
Well, that's the point of free will, I guess.
Yeah.
Is that they can make their choice to stay or not.
Correct.
This a little bit, because we already talked about Tolkien's Catholic, and this a little bit reminds me of weren't there like 40 days and 40 nights where they were wandering in the desert in the Old Testament? So this kind of,
This feels a little bit like that.
yeah.
It does. Little Moses.
Yeah.
So now that the larger portion has left, the ones who remain, the Talari and some of the Noldor, they begin to have a lot of division among themselves, a lot of arguments, and this leads to a lot of critical things that are going to happen in the future of the Middle-earth. We'll cover a little bit of it in this chapter, but you'll see more as we go on. And this actually reinforces the point we made in previous episodes that even though these Valar, even though these semi-gods, demigods, and elves, even though they're portrayed as perfect, they're not.
No.
They are heavily flawed. They have human characteristics of being flawed, even though they have everything going for them. Even elves themselves can fall into darkness and go down a wrong path. So I do appreciate Tolkien for not writing a perfect character. I do love a flawed character because it adds depth to it. So now we get into the captivity of Melkor, the other half of the name of the chapter. So meanwhile, Melkor, whose power remains pretty great, has been observed by the Valar and is eventually captured after a long period of deception and corruption. And his influence over the elves, it's not an absolute, it's not all powerful, but it's something that echoes into his poem Sauron eventually. But it seems like Tolkien implies that Melkor has kind of a, what's the silver tongue? Is that the word or that phrase?
I don't know. What is...
Like he can convince people very well. He's good with his word. He's a wordsmith.
Okay.
He
gotcha.
convinces people to,
He's persuasive.
yes. I thought silver tongued, but
You could be right.
I could be. I don't know. But he never outright says Melkor. That's how he does it. In my head, it's just I assume he's kind of like an agent, kind of like Sauron tried to be, and he's weaving some doubts and acting as if he's a messenger, but he's really not. But some are able to resist, of course, like we said, and some give in. But nevertheless, his imprisonment is temporary, and he will continue to escape, and he will do what Melkor does best. He will
cause chaos.
cause some issues, if you will.
Yeah. So for the a lot of the people who remember Sauron from the movies, I think exactly what Austin was saying there. So there's two things that Melkor kind of does throughout this time. He does try to convince them to not trust the Valar, especially Rome, who they first meet, and then some of the more Valar come over. And then two, he does capture them. And I think for some of you who I'm sure have heard of the debate, how did the orcs first come into being? And of course, Peter Jackson gave a little nod to that in the in the first movie, Fellowship of the Ring, with the Uruk-hai as he's talking to them. But it is implied, I would say, through the there's somewhere in my opinion that when Tolkien writes that Melkor captured and tortured a lot of the elves, the firstborn, as they were making their migration, that was the creation of the orcs, in my opinion, too.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to touch on that.
Yep.
And this was a time period when he first did that. So think of orcs as coming into being definitively after the firstborn arose. And in my opinion, again, it was after he had captured and tortured and mutilated, as Saruman in the Fellowship of the Ring movie discussed with the Uruk-hai.
And that's the reason Power did kind of touch on it too with Adar.
Correct.
A lot of people had beef with Adar. I actually thought it was kind of cool
I thought he was one of the great characters of that show.
because he's like half turned almost. He's like in the middle turning into an orc. It looks like.
Yeah, and then he turns back for a second.
Yes.
You see his elf.
When he gets Galadriel's ring, he turns back into his.
Fair form.
Yeah.
But it is never described. This is our theory. I do want to say that because Tolkien never explicitly says this is how orcs are created.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what Christopher has come out and said, but I think Christopher has pretty much said the same thing too. Was never officially published by Tolkien himself about how the orcs came into being. But this is
But it's implied.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And I think that's rather cool.
And then the other quick thing I want to say too is so for the Valar, so obviously, like I mentioned before the firstborn were even awake, right? That the Valar knew there was bad stuff going on in Amon, that Melkor was sowing a lot of evil creatures and just dark things throughout the country, or the world, should say. But at that point in time, again, Manwë was trying to get them just to finish the work, and the last of the work that needed to be done was creation of the stars. So that when the stars were created, that's when the firstborn arose. But it definitely became apparent after Manwë allowed some ambassadors to, because Roman came back saying, "Hey, these guys are they're getting beat down pretty good.
Yeah.
Like we need to help them." So he went back and immediately started helping as much as he could, as he could get them to trust him. And then Manwë did allow more Valar to become ambassadors, and then that's when he even invited the three leaders of the houses to come over to gain their trust.
And Manwë is actually the leader of the Valar.
Correct.
Right? He's the head Valar.
Head honcho. Yeah. But then after even the ambassadors from the Valar went back, being the three head of the houses, they did agree, okay, we got to do something about Melkor.
Yeah.
So this captivity of Melkor was at that point in time, the elves were still making their journey. Most of the first group of the Valdar had made their way over. But at that point in time, they said, we got to do something. And then they had the siege of Antumo, if I'm saying that correctly.
I believe you
The
are.
big bad fortress of Melkor.
Up in the north.
Yep. And then Tulkas, who was one of the Valkar,
we talked about-
We did talk about
He's the soldier.
he's
Yes.
a soldier.
that I think Tolkien named
after himself.
That's actually a good point. I never even answered that down, but yeah, I think you might be right. But Tulkas wrestled.
Wrestled him. He wrestled Melkor down.
Sorry.
just like a pig wrestled him down. We're from the Midwest, if you can't tell. But yeah, he wrestled Melkor and eventually subdued him. And then they brought him back to Valar and imprisoned him for many ages.
Yep.
Okay.
I will say, as Austin was certain to cast to foretell, that would not be the end of Melkor.
Nope.
There's future doings of his, but for the time being, he is captured and imprisoned in Valar.
And it's referred to as the Void. I don't know what that means. He, of course, never expanded on that.
It sounds a little Robert Jordan-y,
It does.
like the Wheel of Time.
Yes, it
How
does.
they get trapped in those.
I need to read those still.
That's a whole.
It is a haul.
This is one
We'll start here.
thing. Yeah, that's a whole.
But yeah, Melkor is a mischievous little fella, and he will come back to sow his chaos as he likes to do so much. So the chapter really concludes, with the elves getting over to settling in Amon under the protection of Valar, and I believe Manwë reassumes his post atop the mount in front of Oh my god, the name. The I should know. Now I'm disappointed in myself. Anyways, the mountain in front of Eleanor where he watches over, make sure nobody gets past. So now the stage is really set for the unfolding of the great events. Some of these events I'm just going to hint towards. I'm not going to spoil too much, but we are in a pretty soon see the forging of the Silmarils.
Which is where the book gets
Gets its name.
Okay.
There's the unfortunate story of the Noldor. No spoilers.
Sad.
And the eventual struggle between the Valar, the elves, and Melkor's dark forces. So these tensions between free will and corruption, loyalty and rebellion, and the division of the elves will echo throughout the remainder of the Silmarillion. So I think every week I keep saying now the stage is set, but I think now the stage really is set because now we can talk about the Noldor next week.
And I think just a couple of things to add to that I thought were interesting tidbits of this chapter as I was reviewing. The summaries of it was Tolkien does specifically say that when they captured Melkor, when Tulkas wrestled him, that they did not capture a significant portion of the evil creatures he had sowed because there are so many caverns, secret entrances, exits, tunnels within Entumo. There's no way the Valar could capture everyone, so they actually did not capture a significant portion of his minions, his creatures, his lieutenants, and specifically Tolkien in this chapter calls out that Sauron escaped. So even though we have the three groups of elves who did make the journey over, obviously a lot of the elves still did not to stay behind. Some were captured, but it is important to note that even though this is a time of quote unquote peace, as Melkor was captured and transported to Valar and imprisoned, there was still evil things in Arda being led primarily by Sauron, as well as other of his lieutenants and minions. So
basically the elves that are still back in Middle Earth are going to have some fights ahead of them.
And continue to be captured and returned and all of that.
So there is still discourse in the world, but no, the big bad for now is captured. So I really think that's everything I got about this chapter. I think that's... I think now the stage is officially set.
Right. I think the only other kind of cool little tidbit was he did mention that some of I think that they were the Teleri who did stay. They were the first ones to see the Anduin. And as Austin mentioned, there were a lot of different reasons why different clans of elves that, including one of them being the Sindarin, stayed behind. But one of the bigger reasons I would say that Tolkien described is that they fell in love with the beauty of Arda, and they didn't want to leave that, and they thought they could create their own beauty, craft their own realms within that land that they were viewing, and they were saying like, hey, instead of betting on Valar being better, I'm just going to take the given, right? I'm going to take this because I know this is good, and I can prosper in this.
We can mold this.
We can mold this. So I did think it was interesting that I don't remember exactly which Teleri or if he even said who it was, but one of those did see the Anduin. They were the first beings to see the Anduin and the beauty of it, and that's what made them fall in love with Arda.
What is the Anduin?
It's a giant river.
Okay.
Goes. Yep, on the east side of the Misty Mountains that we know of Middle Earth. Yeah.
And it goes to the falls of
Rauros. Yep.
Yeah.
And the Fellowship of the Ring, the movie.
Yeah.
Or Boromir, he's spoilers. Boromir, kicks the can.
Ned Stark, if you will. Okay?
Yes, if you will. Speaking of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, sorry, that was my last one too.
No, this is why you're here. So, as much as I would love to go beyond this chapter and show you some wild things about the Silmarillion, it's time to pivot to Westeros so we can go beyond the wall and to learn some wild things about wildlings.
Hey-o.
I did that myself. I was pretty proud of that.
So proud of
Yep,
you.
thank you. I know. Thank you.
Welcome back and welcome to Westeros. So, like my co-host said, we are going to be talking about some wildlings today, but let me just clear something up for you real fast. The term wildling is a Westerosi term. The wildlings don't call themselves wildlings. They call themselves the free folk because they have no kings or leaders. They kneel for no one.
Our democracy? Okay, I tried.
They actually call everybody from south of the wall kneelers because the people down there, they are always bending their knees to the lords and kings. So
That's chumps.
So the free folk kneel for no one. But Then next, before we dive into the clans and all of that good stuff, let's describe the vast landscape that they call home. So we are now north of the wall. We know it's super cold up there, but we're not quite at the lands of always winter yet. That's way, way north, and that's where the others are from.
Was this Lost?
Well, is
Great
it?
show for one season.
So yes, basically it's just a big expansive taiga forest, which I had to Google, which I guess
I was going to say, I feel like I'm back in grade school learning about taigas and fjords and...
a taiga forest is with evergreen trees, a lot of evergreen type plants.
Okay.
But plants they do have plants. They have a forest. It's called the Haunted Forest. They have two coasts. The eastern coast borders the Bay of Seals, and beyond the Bay of Seals is the Shivering Sea, which kind of also connects to the Narrow Sea.
It doesn't sound like a nice place to live.
No,
You have a haunted forest and a shivering sea.
Shivering Sea.
I think I'm okay.
Well, and then you go to the west. The west has a long mountain range called the Frost Fangs, and the Sunset Sea lies over there.
Sunset Sea. Now we're coming back. Sounds nice.
Sounds all right. The southern border, of course, is the wall, and then no one really knows where the northern border ends because after a certain point, no human has explored or documented anything, and those uncharted lands are what we call the lands of always winter. Like I
So
said,
it's just always cold up there.
always cold.
That sounds awful.
So to be clear, up here where the free folk live, it is bitterly cold most of the time, even in summer, but it's not inhabitable. And it's not always snowing and it's not always frozen. I think the show kind of gives us that idea that it is. But then when you think about it, you're like, people couldn't live somewhere where there was no vegetation and no animals or anything like that. So they do have vegetation. They have animals that roam around. They do have some small farms that get tended. And that's how they are able to carry on without needing to go to the south all the time. So there you go.
Good to know.
The free folk do not have any marked borders between them. They're just kind of split into clans. But between the clans, there's no common law, no common language, really. There's no official religion. You can just kind of follow whichever clan or leader you want to, and you can change. People have done that. Some of the clans have a designated leader, some don't. Some of them are nomadic, so they're more like hunter-gatherers, and they kind of travel all over. Some of them live specifically in a village together, and they don't roam around a whole lot. So, yeah, interesting. And then they all place a heavy importance on keeping your word and on the idea that the earth is meant to be shared, not kept for one king or kingdom. But shared is a loose concept because the vast majority of free folk clans gain all of their possessions by stealing them.
Oh, they're sharing without letting the person who owns it know that you're taking it. Okay.
So they don't see stealing as dishonorable, more so just it's like a necessary means of self-preservation.
So they're just survival of the fittest.
Yeah, very, very much so. Very Darwin-y.
Yes.
It's commendable, if not quite honorable.
To steal?
To steal, yeah. And they also don't really do marriage. That's kind of how they get a partner, is they steal them. They steal the partner.
They're stealing wives out here?
Yeah, they call them spear wives.
Of course.
So they do sometimes practice monogamy with someone that they feel affection for, but never in a permanent way. And
John Smith.
certainly not in a religious manner. No ceremonies are had. Yeah, Jon Snow knows nothing.
He knows nothing.
So now let's dive into all these different clans that we kind of know. Some of these clans we know a lot about. Others are mentioned in like a sentence, so we don't know a lot about them. So we'll start with the ones that we know a lot about. First is the Thenns, and we know, if you remember Tormund Giantsbane from the show, he hates. He says, "I effing hate the Thenns." He does not like the Thenns.
Oh.
They live pretty far north. They live in a valley of the Frostfang Mountains, which is on the west side. The little valley they live in is called Thenn.
Oh.
You know,
So they're just
inventive.
Yep. Real original.
They've been up there for a long time. They still think of themselves as first men just like the Starks and most of the Northmen. They speak the old tongue. They don't speak the common tongue. And they do have a leader it's called the Magnar. And the leader is kind of looked at like a god almost like a Zeus or something like that. And they're super obedient to this Magnar. And for that reason, they're kind of more disciplined than most of the other free folk clans. And they have some pretty sophisticated methods of producing arms and armor. They're fierce fighters. And then in present day Game of Thrones, they're a pretty big deal. If you remember Rattleshirt from the show, he is a Thin.
So my thing is, they're like, man, those Southerners are always bending the knee. But it sounds like Thins are kind of bending the knee to their Magnar.
Yeah. And I think where it's different is that he's not asking for like taxes or like extra things to be given to him.
More just instructing, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't know. I could be wrong. All right. Next up, we're on the opposite end of the spectrum of the Thins. We have the White Tree villagers. White Tree is a really small village, like really small village. It's not far into the Haunted Forest, right kind of northwest of Castle Black. So it's the closest little settlement to Castle Black. There is a massive weirwood tree in the middle of the village, which gives it, that's why it's called White Tree. And it's got 4 homes. Each home, it has 1 room, 4 one-room homes.
Wow.
They have a sheepfold and a well for water. So this place has been visited by rangers from the Watch enough times that it appears on some of the oldest maps that Castle Black has. And then Craster's mother, we're going to talk about Craster in a minute, but Craster's mother was from White Tree, and then his father was supposedly a member of the Watch.
But spoiler, not a good guy.
Bad guy.
Very bad guy.
So there you go. On to Craster. He has a keep. It's not actually a keep. It's not a castle or anything like it. They kind of call it Craster's Keep to like mock him a little bit.
Oh.
The Watchmen do, I mean. So anyway, he's a tenuous friend to the Watch. He lets them stay there on their rangings north of the wall, kind of on their way north. But he also is he's a pretty bad guy. He does have a fenced-in yard, rare. So all your realtors, if you're ever trying to sell Craster's Keep, its biggest selling point is a fenced-in yard.
Man, they got a private backyard.
And his house is on top of a low hill in the Haunted Forest. There is a moat around the bottom of the hill. And then all along the back of the hill is his landfill.
Oh, God.
But he also has a sheepfold and a pigsty. He lives with 19 wives.
Oh, my Lord.
Most of his wives are also his daughters.
Oh, God.
sorry.
No.
I know.
Gross.
Yeah, he's gross. And then there are lots of other daughters who live in that keep as well that are too young for him to wed yet. But he will soon, I guess. Yeah. He has no sons, which is pointed out frequently when the Watchmen are at his keep. There are no little boys, only little girls. And eventually the reader figures out that that's because he sacrifices any sons that are born to him to the cold gods.
What the?
And we don't really know what that means.
Did we not see this in Game of Thrones?
You see it,
You see it, yeah.
but in the book you don't. You just know that this is what he says that he does.
So the cold gods in Game of Thrones interpret that as the White Walkers, but in the books, obviously the White Walkers aren't. They're not the main force of the. Yeah,
right. There's no Night King in the books, so it's not like you. I think it's a John POV chapter where you see him. You see Craster take a baby boy into the woods, and John sees it happen, but John doesn't see what happens to that baby afterwards. He just knows there's like a cold presence there in the woods with them. The show tells you what happens afterwards, and it has the Night King taking the baby
and transforming it into a.
Which that we don't know if it's real or not.
It makes sense though.
And then Craster also likes to brag about how he's not afraid of winter because he has made himself right with the gods, and we assume that is the cold gods. They're not going to harm him because he gives them all his sons. So yeah. That's Craster. He grows.
Yeah,
but his mom,
as Alex, our Tolkien expert, but right now Game of Thrones expert, has said, Not a good guy.
Not a good guy.
Not a good guy. Not someone you want to spend a lot of time with.
No, I'm good.
All right. Next, speaking of Lord of the Rings, this little group of free folk reminds me of hobbits a little bit. They're called the Hornfoots.
Oh.
They live near the Frostfangs, so kind of up near the Fens. And they are known for not wearing anything on their feet, which causes their feet to turn black. So that it just a little bit reminds me of hobbits, because hobbits don't wear shoes either.
Yep.
But they have some chiefs that they look to for leadership, but not in a godlike way, the way that the Fens do. And they are always kind of at war with this other clan called the Night Runners. But then Mance Rayder comes along and brokers a peace between them. Mance Rayder is the king beyond the wall. He's kind of this dude that gets all these different wildling clans to kind of get along and work towards a common goal. So we'll talk about Mance.
Unifying the Wildlings.
Yeah.
It has one of the best names in GOT books, Mance Rayder.
That's a great name.
And there's a lot of theories about him that we will get to in a different episode. But so speaking of the Night Runners that the Hornfoots are always fighting with, we don't really know anything about them, because the only time they're mentioned is in that sentence where it says the Hornfoots are always trying to fight with the Night
You're
Runners.
going to give a really cool clan name and then write nothing about them. The Night Runners? Like, come on.
It's George.
They rad.
And then next up, we've got Ice River clans. These people live furthest west on the riverbanks of the ice rivers, near at the kind of the foot of the Frostfangs. These people are said to be cannibals,
Oh.
and they don't like the men of the frozen shore, which we were going to talk about in a second. And then again, they don't like these men of the frozen shore until Mance Rayder brokers a peace between them.
I get unifying all the wildlings, but Mance couldn't look at these people, see they're cannibals, and be like, man, maybe we don't trust them.
Maybe we leave them on the ice river.
Maybe we let them do their own thing.
And then the men of the frozen shore, we know a little bit more about them. They're actually split into two. There's two clans within the clan. And the way you tell the difference between them is that one of them wears antlers on their heads, and then there's others that wear walrus tusks kind of around their mouth. Those two little groups don't like each other, but they will join together to fight the Ice River clans. That's kind of their deal.
Really?
Yes.
Huh.
They're different from other free folk because they do actually have kind of a religion. They worship what they call the gods of snow and ice. Rather than the old gods. Most of the other free folk would just tell you that they follow the old gods, and that's about it. And then the fun fact, these men of the frozen shore ride sleds pulled by dogs, and they do that so they can herd and breed reindeer.
They're pulled by smooshies.
We love reindeers. I love reindeers.
It's
Caribou.
It's very festive, especially the time of year.
Yes, see. And they raid Bear Island often. Bear Island, we know Bear Island.
The one soldier of Bear Island is that of 60 soldiers or whatever.
Yes, indeed. So these men of the frozen shore are the ones, usually if somebody on Bear Island has been raided or stolen from, it's probably a man of the frozen shore. Okay, and last up for our clan section is the cave dwellers. The cave dwellers live around, like near and around Fen, that valley in the Frostfangs, but they are not Fens. They dye and paint their faces like blue, green, and purple, but it's not really known what those colors mean. They also file their teeth into sharp points.
Oh, God.
Again, we don't really know why.
Just because.
Yeah, I guess. And they are rumored to worship an underground god that is like a dark god. So we
Sounds
don't.
a little devilish.
We don't.
Teeth filing
mess with
and
them.
underground god. It sounds a little culty. I'm okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we leave them out too. We don't bring them into the union.
We could. And then present day notable characters that in a future episode, I want to do like a character deep dive on a lot of these. But since this one, we're just kind of introducing you to Wildlings and Beyond the Wall and all that type of stuff, I'm just going to give you a list that we will revisit later. First up was the guy with the cool name, Mance Rayder.
Great name.
Great name. I think this is also a great name too. Tormund Giantsbane.
Oh, wow. I am.
Tormund is a good name.
It is.
Rattleshirt is a good name.
Does he have a rattly shirt on?
Well, it's made of bones.
Oh. Is he
He's also called
cannibal?
Rattleshirt is also called the Lord of Bones.
Is he a cannibal himself?
No, he's a
Okay.
Thin.
Okay, good.
And then Dala and Val, those are two ladies
Hmm.
that I like. They're actually
Dollar bills, you know?
I know. Val is actually one of my low-key favorite characters, even though she doesn't get mentioned very often, but I do want to do a deep dive on her at some point. And then I forgot to add her to the list, but we can't forget Egret.
Oh, you can't.
Yeah. Egret is going to be a deep dive at some point in the future as well. So that's it on no, not the children, the
Wildlings.
Wildlings,
Or the free folk.
the free folk. Yeah, you guys ready to dive into the children of the forest?
Yeah, I have a lot of questions about these people.
Okay. Well, they're not people.
Oh,
They're
a lot of questions about these
Yeah.
creatures, beings.
Yeah. All right. So, children of the forest. It makes sense to talk about them at the same time as the wildlings because in present day Game of Thrones, they only live beyond the wall. Basically, unless some of them maybe live on the Isle of Faces, which we'll get to, but pretty much they don't exist in Westeros anymore. They only live beyond the wall. So, but the children, they're old. They've been around since the Dawn Age, which is like kind of the first age in the history of Game of Thrones. The Dawn Age is like the beginning of time. They're only referred to as children by humans because they're small in stature, but they are not human and they are also not childlike. So they can live for centuries. Before the first men arrived, they lived all over the continent of Westeros, kind of in tandem with the giants, although sometimes the giants and the children would kind of war back and forth.
Oh,
I know there's one sentence where Leaf is a child of the forest and she's talking to Bran and she says something like, the giants are our bane and our brothers. So they're like the bane of our existence, but also our brothers.
frenemies.
Yeah, frenemies. So,
I think that's how you thought about me from the age
No.
of 12 to 16.
Frenemies.
the only places in Westeros where there's no evidence that the children ever lived are Dorne. The children call Dorne the empty land.
Because it's desert.
It's just desert,
Yep.
yeah. And then there's also no evidence that the children ever made their way over to the Iron Islands. So,
Oh,
yes. The children speak the true tongue, which is a language, it's more so a language of sounds and songs than actual words.
it's the same language I speak when I first wake up.
Yes, indeed. The sounds of nature.
Live a grump in the morning.
Well, so they, in their own language, they call themselves those who sing the song of the earth, which is just indicating that they're very connected to nature, earth, etc. Kind of like the elves that we talked
Yes.
about in Lord of the Rings. They're
Nature centric.
super grounded and rooted in the earth and taking care of the earth. So the sounds in their language that they make are based on nature. So like a babbling brook or like a soft wind or, things like that. So, but their voices are said to be very pure.
Pure.
Yes. This is what they look like. They have nut brown skin. It is dappled with paler spots like a deer. So think of like a baby deer that's got, dappled skin.
Kind of adorable.
It is until they do their claws at you.
Oh,
They have large ears that can hear things that humans cannot hear, which is useful. They have large golden green eyes that are slitted like a cat,
oh God.
which helps them see well in a dark passageway. They only have 3 fingers and a thumb, but their fingernails, they're not fingernails, they're sharp black claws. So they can climb. They're
Okay, it
good
went from
climbers.
cute to kind of I'm a little scared. I'm a little terrified now.
Yeah. They're quick and graceful. They like to weave leaves, vines, flowers, things like that into their hair. And then all of their clothing is made from leaves. This helps them blend into their surroundings easily as well as connects them back to nature. If a baby, like a baby child of the forest, is born with purely green or purely red eyes, those are said to be chosen by the old gods, and they have green sight, or they're called green seers, which means usually they can kind of see the future and the past. They've got these like prophetic visions. So,
I see a no coming up, and it was my exact question.
So these babies of the these kids, I guess it's hard to because they're called the children, but
Right.
the green seers that are born to the children of the forest, they typically don't live very long, whereas most children of the forest can live like hundreds and hundreds of years. These don't live very long unless they get bound to a weirwood tree. I don't know what that process entails. It's just what it says. It's just they have to get bound to a weirwood tree. And then they can live for a super long time, like even longer than regular children of the forest. So my question is this what Bloodraven has become? We talked about Bloodraven in the last episode. It does pretty specifically state he's like intertwined,
Engulfed in the tree.
in the roots of the tree.
So I assume it's the same thing for green seers. They need to be, which is
Yeah.
a horrible existence, I feel like. But
Yeah, but that's how he can see so many things. That's why he's still alive after all this time.
future schmoosher, past schmast. I want food. You can't eat food if you're stuck to a tree. It's
The
awful.
roots feed you.
Yeah, but I want a cheeseburger.
And then my better question is this what Bran will become?
I think yes, but that's my theory.
TBD.
But if he ever writes it,
If he ever writes it. Or if Bran refuses to do this, does that mean Bran is going to die young?
oh,
Hard to say.
He definitely has been chosen. It seems.
he has.
Yep. So there you have that fun little question that we
Okay,
really don't have an answer to. But
Maybe we will.
if he ever writes the book.
He will. Maybe.
Other than, so that's kind of their, appearance, the children's appearance. Culturally, they maybe kind of lived in clans, but they were nomadic. They lived off the land. They did not use money, no cloth, no metals, no cities, no books, no written language. It was pretty clear none of that stuff existed. They used stone and obsidian in all of their weapons and tools. Bark, vines, and leaves made up all their clothing. So there was no need for like trade really or anything like that because they just
foragers almost.
they just used what was right in front of them. Men and women could hunt together. Power to the
Yes.
women.
Very progressive.
So progressive. But the hunters called themselves woods dancers, and then eventually those that could hunt would eventually become warriors when the first men showed up and they started to kind of battle with the first men. It was their former hunters turned warriors. But their weapons were weirwood bows, snares made from grasses, and then obsidian tipped arrows, swords, things like that.
I feel like we touched on this in a previous episode, but I'm baffled that you can make weapons from weirwood.
Yes.
I feel like that's taboo.
Yeah, I would agree.
Huh.
Maybe it's like a twig that already fell.
That's true.
I don't know. But yeah, I would think you're not supposed to cut. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I don't think you're supposed to cut off.
Maybe
Although,
we have established the trees have somewhat sentience. They have power. So I'm wondering maybe they gift a branch or something like that.
yeah. Yeah, that could be. It's also pretty much canon that the children of the forest were gifted with this powerful magic and they used it to their advantage on multiple occasions. That's the fun thing about Westeros is like this magic stuff. Like it's pretty confirmed in several different instances that no, they used some magic and the magic worked. So whereas I feel like a lot of other series, it's like, oh, we can science explain that magic away or whatever,
Right.
This one's pretty confirmed, but they have power over animals and beasts, which comes in handy, especially I would guess when they're hunting. They can wear an animal's skin. That's word for word what the book says. They can wear an animal's skin.
Transform.
I am assuming it means like warg. And if you watched the show, you saw there was a couple of different characters who could warg. Bran can warg into his wolf. I think that's what they mean by that. I don't think they actually mean they're skinning an animal and wearing it.
Yeah.
I think it just means they can like kind of get into the mindset of an animal. But
Makes sense.
yeah. And then they create this beautiful music. That's their language. But it's said to bring any listeners to tears.
Wow.
And then some of them have green sight. We talked about them already. And then some of them are also able to speak to the dead, which is weird but cool. The children are the ones who cut all the faces into the weirwood trees.
Oh.
They did that to keep watch over the woods.
I thought the trees just grew with the face on.
No, the children did that. And they didn't do that until the first men showed up. So the trees were just trees until the men showed
So the trees don't have power.
Well,
It's
they do.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought they were sentient, but they're not. They just have power.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're the gods use the trees to see.
It's almost like a facilitator of power.
The
almost.
old gods, I should be clear.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then another thing about the children, they believe that once they die, they become part of the werewood connection underground, which is basically the old gods. That's
Yeah.
how they operate. They're a connection of werewood roots underground. So yeah. The next big thing with the children that I wanted to talk about is the pact. We've already kind of touched on the pact in episode 1, but just wanted to revisit it real quick to point out some more details now that we've circled back. So we know the pact happened 10,000 years before present day Game of Thrones. It was made between the children of the forest and the first men after the children used their magic to bring down the Hammer of the Waters, which broke the Arm of Dorne, resulting in the Stepstones, which is a series of islands instead of a whole land bridge. And the Stepstones, you saw the Stepstones in House of Dragon, if you remember season 1. So that's where that came from. We also know that the pact that they made, the two parties, made on the Isle of Faces, which is an island in the middle of a lake. The lake is called the God's Eye, and that whole area is real close to Harrenhal.
And we know there are some important events that take place
We sure do.
at this very spot.
So let's dive into the pact a little bit. So who was in the room where it happened, or on the Isle
The room where it happened.
We know it was the Green Seers and the Woods Dancers on the children's side. So kind of their leaders a little bit. They're warriors and they're
leader.
people that can see the future. Then the first men brought their heroes and chiefs. I don't know what that means, but some big guns.
Yep.
Big guns were in the room where it happened. What did they agree on? They agreed that the children would retain the still standing forests, so the first men would not try to fell any more forest land.
Well,
And then the first men, therefore, can settle all of the open lands, so the coastlands, high plains, meadows, mountains, bogs. And then no more chopping of werewoods.
I feel like that's a very important rule.
No more chopping. And then how did they seal the deal? One, they carved faces into every werewood on the Isle before the pact was made so that the old gods could bear witness to this pact. And remember, the old gods know if you're lying, they can tell, and they do not like that.
They don't like that.
It was bad.
Cut that out.
And don't be lying. Remember, sometimes they made them put their hand into the
Yes.
tree's mouth before you would say a vow. And then together, I still find this interesting, and it's still a big old mystery. There's not hardly anything about these people on the wiki or in the world of Ice and Fire. So anyway, here we go. Both of these parties, children and the first men, established this sacred order called the Green Men to maintain and keep watch over this Isle of Faces, where all these werewoods are, which I would assume means there's lots of kind of magical power on this island. Yeah, we're going to circle back to these green men in just a second. So, how did the pact play out? Well, it ended the Dawn Age, and then it ushered in the Age of Heroes, which is kind of the second age. If we're doing Lord of the Rings, that would be the Dawn Age is the first age. The Age of Heroes is the second age.
Nice tie-in.
You know, there were 4,000 years of peace between the children and the first men. And then the Long Night came and the birth of the Seven Kingdoms after that. So then, you know, it held up pretty well
For well.
until the Andals
Oh boy.
until they done showed up.
Mischievous handles.
So, yeah, all in all, the pact lasted about 5,000 years, which I would say is pretty good.
That's,
Pretty good
that's
pact.
not bad.
Pretty good pact.
Longer than most modern alliances and
Yeah.
the kingdoms held up. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it was good.
Successful.
Good deal.
Successful pact.
Yes. All right. So let's go back to these green men, and then I think I'm done after that. But all right, the green men, they're referred to as the sacred order. So I kind of picture monks that like to garden.
Oh,
You know,
that's
some gardening monks.
yeah.
There is some outlandish stories about them that claim they have green skin and horns. I don't think that's true. The maesters from Old Town say it's just their clothing that's green, and sometimes they might have a headdress with antlers. Old Nan, we love Old Nan.
We love old man.
We love her. She says that the green men can ride elk.
Wow.
But what we do know about them is that they were able to hold the Isle of Faces during the Andal invasion. The Andals could not even access the Isle of Faces because the green men on their isle were able to fend them off.
Well, I was about to call them the Westerosi hippies, but they can fight, so maybe
Or they can use magic.
there it is.
Yeah, I don't know. No one knows. But supposedly they are still there, operating, 10,000 years later. So who knows?
Not bad.
Notable visitors to the Isle of Faces. One of them is Strike Through because it's a spoiler for House of the Dragon, so I'm not going to talk about that one.
Okay.
But the second one that we know about in the Game of Thrones books is the Knight of the Laughing Tree from the story that Mira and Jojen tell Bran about the tourney at Harrenhal that Ned Stark attended as a young child. And there was this magical knight showed up and entered the tourney and ended up winning the tourney, but he calls himself the Knight of the Laughing Tree. He supposedly visited the Isle of Faces before he entered himself into the tourney. So
Wow.
there you have it.
And I'm sure in the show,
Sure in the show.
we will see whatever your
House of the Dragon?
yes.
Oh, for sure. There's no way they're not gonna. If they don't, I'll be mad. But yeah, there's no way they're not gonna put that in there. I'm guessing it's gonna happen towards the end of season 3.
Okay, that'll be interesting to see. I want to see what it's pictured like.
Yeah, I do too, because you don't really get to see it in Game of Thrones. So yeah, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed learning some tidbits about the Wildlings, the free folk. Sorry, no, they're not Kneelers.
Nope.
Children of the Forest. They're some of my favorite groups in the series, just because they're so unique. I think they're not.
Yeah.
They're not, and they kind of, for the most part, stay out of the politics. They get straight to the root of like, hey, there's something bad coming, and we all need to fight it. They stay out of the Southern politics for the most part. But yeah.
And they've been around for so long. I feel like obviously they're doing something right.
Right. Yeah. And then again, especially with the Wildlings, we will come back to some individual character breakdowns in later episodes. I just wanted to start with an overview.
Perfect. That was very informative.
Very informative.
Well, fellow adventurers, that is a wrap for today's journey into the realms of Westeros and Middle-earth. We hope you've enjoyed journeying through the histories, mysteries, and fascinating lore of these worlds.
We will return with insights, laughs, and maybe even some unexpected dragons of wisdom along the way. Next up in our Middle-earth adventure, we will learn of Valinor, Beleriand, and Fëanor. Our tour of Westeros will take us to the Riverlands, and we will be introduced to the Tully family.
Until then, stay curious and keep the conversation going on our socials. And thank you for tuning in, and remember, the best adventures are the ones we take together.
We swear it by the old gods and the new.
Peace.